Start by thanking the organizers and thank you, the audience, especially if you got up as early as I did. I'm on Pacific Coast time, so it's approximately 6:03 here. Just so you all know, I got quite a few questions between like last week and now, and I will attempt to address them. They will coincide with the slides, but I'll do my best to answer as many as I can during this time period. I want to be clear that I'm representing myself. So I would consider this a primer on accessibility and disability inclusion, and really what I've seen work in building disability inclusion initiatives in nonprofits, in government, and in corporations. You'll definitely hear similar points made yesterday by the amazing Mike Shabanik and Gurpreet Kaur in this same track, but I have clearly, I'm way older than them and have been around for quite a while and have, my own experiences, like I said, in government, disability nonprofits, and in corporations. So I was asked to do an intro, a little about me. As I said, I'm a boomer in my 60s. I will describe briefly. I'm a Latinx woman with salt and pepper hair, more salt as every day goes by. I come from a large Latino family, or Latinx for those in this new generation. I'm one of 6 siblings, and I also have a blind sister. And I bring this up because I think it was difficult for my parents, of course, to have 2 blind siblings. But for me, it was a blessing because we were able to be each other's touchstone. So we are the middle of 2 kids, and we still don't know why we're blind. So we've kind of moved on. Peggy and I, I'm assuming most of you know Peggy because she's been around almost as long as I have. She's actually younger, but she's quite involved in the disability field and in technology and wayfinding. Anyway, we were both raised with very high expectations. We had to, we were part of the family. My parents fought very hard for us to go to mainstream school. So I was mainstream from kindergarten all the way through high school. And I think it's important to talk about that experience because for me, I felt very much woven into the fabric of my classes. Again, I started at kindergarten. I was a Braille user, so I had the benefit of learning how to read at the same speed the other kids did. But the main thing I think about children when they are around people with disabilities from the beginning, or they have that interaction, is that before they're taught to fear and learn stereotypes about us, they really were instrumental in providing what Francis West, I think, calls authentic accommodations. And so, examples where they figured out how I could play Foursquare or tetherball even, or, how I would run around the bases. Nobody taught them this. This was just something that they figured out on their own. And I was very lucky because, of course, came home with some bumps and bruises, but for the most part, it benefited me. I graduated from high school and was a client of the Department of Rehabilitation. I was placed into a lock factory. I remember my counselor was very excited to find this job for me, and he was very, he felt like I should be very grateful, which I was at that time. It was in the late 70s. I was very grateful. Way before the ADA, 504 was kind of just getting its legs. But I worked in that factory for 9 months, and decided it was not for me. I went back to the Department of Rehab and asked him if I could go to college. And they basically said that my case had been closed. So eventually I did go to college, and the Department of Rehab did help, but it took me 13 years to graduate. I was raising a kid and traveling off to various countries to work on disabilities issue. But I really, I would say that the 7-year plan didn't work for me. It did take 13 years. After the lock factory, I moved to San Francisco Bay Area, late 70s, early 80s, found the disability rights / advocacy movement. And here I am today. I have had quite a long work history, as you can see on your slides, for those of you who can. I think I forgot to say I'm blind. Oh, maybe I did. Anyway, and I was born blind. I did say I was a Braille reader. So very quickly, I started off, working for the World Institute on Disability, eventually became the director. I moved then in 2009 to work for President Obama as an assistant secretary. My passion has been employment for people with disabilities and economic justice for people with disabilities. How do we get out of the poverty trap? And how can we work if we're able to? Moved from the Department of Labor to Wells Fargo. Then I was a CEO of Disability Rights Advocates, which is a disability advocacy law firm. And now I'm at Expedia Group, which I'm very proud to work for this company. I think we're doing amazing things around travel. And right now, I just want to give a shout out to my partner in good trouble, Dennis Molinis. He's somewhere out there in Etherland. Anyway, next slide. Let's talk about disability. I'm just going to go through this very quickly. Disability is the most intersectional identity, crossing all social, racial, gender, and economic lines. Typically, anybody can join at any time, of course, usually not by choice. According to the World Health Organization, 16% of the world's population has a disability, with 46% of people over 60 having one or more disabilities. As a baby boomer who was born with a disability, this is a very important number to me, because assuming I will be acquiring other disabilities, I guess if that's the case, I was born in the right era. 56, the growth rate for people, the aging growth rate is 56%. And that's between 2015 and 2030. We'll have a 56% growth rate of people who are over 65. This is a huge market, which I'll talk about later, but just quickly, $8 trillion in yearly global spend, and 13 trillion if we include people who are what we call disability adjacent. My family, my friends, my partner would be considered disability adjacent population. Next slide. Barriers for employment for us still exist, and barriers for inclusion still exist. The more we are employed and the more our needs become standard operating practices, these barriers will decrease. But these barriers include myth, fear, stereotype. We have all these laws that are great. And I have to say, I'm very proud to have been a part of the team to have gotten Section 503 over the line, which is a US law that mandates that government contracts have a 7% utilization goal regarding bringing people with disabilities into their companies. But even though we have these laws and executive orders, you can't legislate attitude, right? You still have barriers in physical, digital communications. And I think in many cases, although it's changing, there's a perception that disability inclusion is the right thing to do, as opposed to a business win. Even with these barriers, employment is trending up for people with disabilities. And a lot of that had to do, excuse me, I'm going to grab some water here. A lot of that had to do with the pandemic and people working from home. And a lot of it had to do with the surge in DEI programs after the death of George Floyd. Next slide, building a foundation. So disability inclusion is both, it's an organizational change issue and a culture change issue. And I'll just say that, we use the term people, processes, and technology, and that's a massive amount of change to make in any organization. So, we're changing minds when we set up a disability initiative. We're changing skill sets and habits. And ultimately, we're changing the culture. We're changing behavior at scale. And it really involves multiple roles in all aspects of the business. Leaders, colleagues, customers, all the stakeholders you can imagine, because the goal is that people with disabilities have a good experience as employees and customers, right? So I have worked in 2 companies and consulted for many. I'm not going to go into that list, but for me, the start has been support from the top. And of course, from the grassroots. But this all takes time, and it takes as much of a plan or strategy as you can devise. It also takes pressure from your customers, as we all know. Some of us, for better or worse, and mostly for better, had to sue certain banks, certain stores, and certain restaurants to make their services and products more accessible. So pressure from customers doesn't hurt. It helps. I think the next thing, and this is something that Mike Shabanik and Gurpreet Gar mentioned, is where is the culture? So you go in to a company and you're thinking about setting up a disability inclusion initiative. I think it's really important to get a beat on the culture. Is there an overall inclusion priority? What are the inclusion goals? How are, I think disability inclusion, it's a DEI issue, but it's also more than that. How is the company handling other underrepresented groups or individuals? We call them URIs, URGs. Many companies set goals for this. And, if you're a federal contractor, then you have the 7% utilization goal, which really, I think, forces companies to do a much better job recruiting and not just say, oh, we tried, but we can't find anybody. But really, it kind of holds the pedal to the metal or their foot to the fire, however you want to say. They have to prove that they're actually reaching out to the disability community. So when you look at the company culture, it's always really important to ask the question, where would disability fit in a company? And there is no right answer. So at Ford Foundation, the disability work is led out of the office of the president. in other companies and foundations, because philanthropy is getting more and more involved in this and really taking a stand, having been led by Rebecca Coakley at the Ford Foundation and Robert Wood Johnson and a number of big philanthropic organizations have disability leadership groups. So it's not just in the nonprofits or government or corporations, but it's also in these big foundations. But a lot of the disability inclusion work comes out of HR or compliance or marketing. When I was at Wells Fargo, I was based in marketing, which was one of the best experiences of my life because I was able to learn so much. And some companies have the disability strategy lead in their ESG or social impact team. Or in the case now with me and Dennis, we are on our diversity, equity, and inclusion team. And that's where the disability inclusion strategy lead is based. When getting started, it really depends on who in the C-suite is championing, setting up the program. Or maybe it's a project being rolled out. So I've seen disability organizations start because of a project. One example is the Australian government, when I think it's 2000, God, that long ago. So the Australian government really made a big push around accessibility when they got the Olympics because, well, they had to. And now France is doing the same thing. I think London did, we sure did in '96. So often the work can come out of a project rollout. And those are all really opportunities. I haven't seen the disability inclusion spirit die, given that post George Floyd, there are now there's some backlash in companies regarding DEI. I haven't really seen that around disability. I've seen companies change the name for disability or for diversity, equity, and inclusion and call it something like, I don't know, some other title like market inclusion, market integration. But so far I have not seen disability get axed. So again, you can start with a project, or if you come in, if there's the appetite for a disability inclusion initiative, you can start with a strategy and define your projects. I've seen companies do both. Use opportunities, I already mentioned the Olympics. Eventually, you'll want a strategy. I think it's really important to develop a strategy, a long-term and a short-term strategy, and timelines to begin to measure. It's the only way you're going to measure progress. And those goals, will really change, have to change with the business priorities. So you're looking at culture, and you're looking at strategy, and really making sure that it coincides with the priorities of the business, which change all the time. So there's typically two models that I've seen. I'm sure there's many more, but either you're decentralized or centralized. And right now at Expedia, I and Dennis, my colleague, are leading the disability strategy, but it's a hub and spoke model. So we have disability champions from many business functions, kind of reporting into us. It really depends on the project. So there's the hub and spoke model, and then there's the disability decentralized model, which is I think it's like Google has a decentralized model. In my mind, what has worked best for me, and again, this is one person's experience, having a centralized strategy lead, and then having dotted lines, from various business functions leading into the disability inclusion team. Because the goal really is that we don't want to be an island, right? We want people to get religion, so to speak. But, having one group that guides the work for me has been pretty successful. And, you want every line of business to have at least one disability inclusion project. I mean, that's the goal. Things won't happen immediately. But my goal is that disability inclusion becomes woven into the culture of the organization, but also into the run rate of the various budgets. So I would say the next point is nothing about us without us. We know this, but it's always really worth repeating. You have to keep the disability community close. Lived experience does matter. And I think that for so often people have spoken for us or about us. And now we're just, kind of getting our sea legs on after 50 years of disability rights movement, legislation, influence. And we're really moving forward in so many directions. It's making an impact in the business world in so many levels. So really keeping the disability community involved, hiring people with disabilities, obviously. I know a lot of this is things that most of you know, I think, or many of you do, or maybe all of you do. But people ask so often, like, what is the best training that I know about disability etiquette, disability, how to change attitudes? My answer is always hire people with disabilities, and not just for disability focused work, but as coders, as marketers, as everything you can imagine. So moving on to influence, everyone can be an influencer. I think when building out teams in the business functions, how do we convince someone to become a disability champion? How do we convince someone to become an ally? Do they have a family member with a disability? Do they have a non-evident disability? Are they aging like me? And then how can they influence their peers? For me, working with the business leadership groups has been a critical step in gathering allies from all over the company. I think this is where the DEI landscape is really has worked for me. We know that people of color, at least in the US, have a higher incidence of disability overall. And this has been, something, this is unfortunate, but it has been something that people have resonated with. Then I would say how to equip them to be spokespeople. It's really important to not just have one person. It's important to not have one person do anything in a company, because if you lose that person, then you lose your institutional knowledge. Always want multiple points of view, develop a speakers bureau. I think that's critical so that you have different points of view, and people come to this work at different points of entry, right? People are on their disability journey, or they're watching somebody have a disability journey. Most people with disabilities are not born disabled like I was. They become disabled. And many people become disabled during their work life. And many people work past 65. So kind of knowing where people are in their disability journey is a really important part of how to influence. I think it's important to really strive that we value disability as a business priority, and we want to make inclusion around accessibility and disability inclusion standard operating practice, because and really want to build a deep bench of experts or people who have passion. Because as I said earlier, when somebody moves on, you want to leave a cadre of passionate experts so that they so that the company doesn't have to kind of rebuild the whole initiative. I've seen it happen too many times where people start an initiative, it's really hot. Somebody in the C-suite has a disabled family member or they're disabled, they start a project, and then when they leave, the project dies. So my goal is really to weave disability throughout the fabric of the company, develop as many passionate experts as possible, and provide opportunities for them to tell their stories, because really that's how we move the needle. And again, business resource groups can make a big difference. I've worked with business resource groups and had, as I said, amazing conversations about how culture impacts views on disability. And this has really led to people feeling safe to come out at work and also serve as spokespeople. So often people feel afraid to come out at work. It's very similar to the LGBTQ community, where you're often, if you have a disability, the only person in your family. And if you have a non-evident disability, very often people don't talk about it. So creating a safe space and a safe environment to have people, so people can come out, I think is really critical. And, don't forget the people with disabled family members, friends, companions, whoever, they begin to feel welcome and are often willing to be disability champions and sometimes have more religion than I do. So I'm trying to move on here. Yeah, I'll just repeat my comment about budgets. Really, the bottom line is very important to keep your eye on. And that's why it's important to treat disability inclusion as a business priority and not a special project or someone's pet project. I think I've made that point. Mike Shabanik said this, I can't remember where I heard him say this, but it bears repeating, that the disability cannot be somebody's pet project. So when sorry, I'm trying to move quickly. Okay, I think I want to talk about like unlocking leadership potential throughout the company. I think that's really, really important. Someone sent a question about self-assessments and self-identification, which is a whole like day's worth of conversation. We could spend, a week on it, but self-assessments, of course, for both physical communications, internal and external, are important because we need a baseline. And these take planning, they take budget, they take time. And if you're a global company, it can be very complicated because some EU companies have like workforce councils, so they have to approve questions you might ask. So it is something that is very important, but it's also something that takes time. You have to really think of privacy issues. But it will help, obviously, in your strategy development when you know how your, if somebody can get into your building, how your internal and external comms are, how are you recruiting people, how are we onboarding people? So there's a lot to look at when you're starting a program. I would say, again, stay close to the disability community. There's a lot of talent in this community, and likely people with disabilities are looking for a job, even on, people attending this conference. Moving on to training, etiquette training. It's good to have training. I think it's important, but I think it's really important to also say that training is not a means. Training is a means to an end. It is not an end. And so often I think companies get stuck in this hamster wheel. They say, okay, we did it. That's it. We did the training. But if training isn't changing behavior, it's worthless. And so, I think it's good to have recordings of some trainings. You can, check the box and pick the right choice. But there's really nothing like interaction. And I know it's expensive, but I really encourage companies to give people opportunities to be in situations where they can ask questions. So, this means sometimes live storytelling opportunities, right? Whether through panels or brown bags or through demos of assistive technology products. Those often bring people together. When a company is rolling out a new product, or even if a company is winning an award, what does that mean for the company? So I think a lot of the work that goes into storytelling, and when people start really developing projects and products, it's important to share. Google's very good at this. Microsoft's very good at this. All the playbooks that they have online about what they did that worked really well, and they share it. It's a great thing, because essentially they're helping us not reinvent the wheel. I mean, every company is different and every company culture is different. But if you can get tips from some of us who've been around forever, that's a good thing. Take advantage of it. These make a big difference. I think, storytelling, that's a whole other conversation. It just makes such a big difference in giving people a sense of belonging, both internally and people who may want to join your workforce. So I'm going to talk about marketing. How am I doing, Grace?
I was just going to jump in and tell you, Kathy, we're about 35 minutes after the hour for your planning.
Okay, well, we'll race through marketing. So 84% of consumers find companies who are inclusive of people with disabilities and their families more trustworthy than those who don't. And they will do more business with those companies. I think we know that. The buying power of disability community, we said $8 trillion, $13 trillion for people with adjacent disabilities. My friends and partner definitely notice. Many companies still speak for us and about us, as if we, are incapable of speaking for ourselves. But it is changing I would say over the last 10 years, we've seen really significant changes. I think things that make a big difference, that have really moved the needle, is cast people with disabilities. There's lots of talent out there. Confront the stigmas head on. Tell stories where people with disabilities are capable, valuable, and valued. And please avoid the non-disabled savior trope, which I see a lot, meaning that the non-disabled person, comes to save the day and save the disabled person from their plight, or from our plight, I should say. While dramatic, well, it could have a dramatic effect, it really does not address the issues of disability inclusion and access. And this type of, I don't know, this trope, I think hurts us more than almost any of the other ones. So the other thing I'll say, and then I'll stop, is, we are really fighting hard against inspiration porn, and people ask me to address this, so I'm going to talk about it. This is where people with disabilities are depicted as, doing ordinary or extraordinary act, like the disabled person sitting atop a mountain with the caption that says, "What's your excuse?" We definitely consider that inspiration porn. Or, I think the other one that Stella Young, the late Stella Young, used in her amazing video, which I encourage everybody to watch, is, the amputee running track with a caption that says, "The only disability is a negative attitude." That's not the road we want to go down. I will stop because I know I'm out of time, and I really am grateful for the opportunity. There's a lot more to say. If people have questions, I'm very findable. So thank you very much. Take it away, Grace.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Let's get into some questions. So Ray says, throughout my over 35-year working career, I've encountered reluctance to see disability as part of the overall DEI space. Do you think that there is still reluctance in this area? And if so, why?
Well, yes, I think there is, although I think it's changing. People are fighting for dollars, right? They're fighting for resources. So I think it's changing. I think it's where I've seen it work very successfully has been, well, let me just say one path to success has been through the DEI space. And I think that really started improving after 2020. But I think the reluctance is, sharing the pie that is often very small in companies. Some companies have very large investments into belonging and inclusion, but there's some companies that don't, and so the pie, if we split it, if we include accessibility, like if we have DEIA, as some companies are calling it now, the pie gets smaller. I think it's really about resources. Hello?
Oops, I'm sorry, I was talking on mute there, Kathy. Thank you for that explanation. Dennis here asked, for those organizations who are starting their disability inclusion journey, what are some best practices that they can activate to begin that journey?
Well, I think there has to be a tone from the top, for one thing. And I don't know if I mentioned that, but it was definitely in my notes. There has to be a will. And I think, it really depends on the company culture. Is the company ready for this? Because it is an organizational change that's big. It's not just, somebody in some island going to conferences and talking about inclusion. It's actually creating an inclusive environment, inclusive products, making sure your stakeholders feel included. So I would say the steps are, have the tone from the top. The leadership has to be in agreement, and then figure out the culture. I think, figure out who are the change makers in your company. I think that's really critical, because you want to hitch your wagon to them, and they change. So you've got always kind of keep your eye on who's driving change. You hire people. I mean, it does cost money, so people do need to know that. This is something that companies have to invest in. Hire people, develop a strategy, bring in disability champions from all lines of business or business functions, and then keep growing and keep embedding both the mindset and the skill sets of how to do this into the company. So when you leave or I leave, there's there's a good solid bench of experts and passion that you leave behind.
Absolutely. A lasting legacy.
There you go. That's the word.
Kathy, you mentioned how important hiring people with disabilities is for all of these DE&I efforts. Are there specifically job boards out there for people with disabilities? Where might a company seek out individuals who have disabilities? And this person also asks, is it wrong to do that?
It is not wrong. It is it's the best way. Look, people don't get to know people with disabilities through laws or through mandates. People get to know people with disabilities when they're, slugging, when they're slogging, right beside them. My colleagues, wherever I've worked, did not get to know me because of the ADA or even before the ADA. They got to know me because I brought something to the table. I brought value to the table. I could be an ally to them. And there are many job boards, Disability In. I know I'm going to forget somebody, so I don't want to say. I know that I have a tiny little resource page. And another company is Enable Ventures. There's numerous job boards in the UK, all over the world. There are, there's agencies set up to help disabled people find work. It's not a US thing, definitely a global advocacy movement. And I can talk, whoever asks this question, just feel free to reach out. I'm happy to talk to you further, because there are so many opportunities to hire people with disabilities, qualified people with disabilities. Remember, it's not a charity, and we can't just say it's the right thing to do, because that doesn't fly when budgets get cut.
Right. What are examples of opportunities or methods that can be created for creating champions of accessibility within the organization?
Well, we tend to respond to things that involve us, right? We do. We're human, and we are, about us for the most part. Now, I know there are exceptions, but I think the storytelling opportunities are one. I think hiring people with disabilities, because and not just in disability or disability specific positions, but hire somebody with a disability is a great marketer. There's many people out there. If anybody's interested in marketing, I think one of the people that's really a shining star now is Kelsey Lindell. She's amazing. But just there are people with disabilities whose expertise is not just in disability advocacy. So that is the best way, because we mix it up, right? We mix it up. We see what people can offer. We see that they can do things differently and get a similar result. We learn that things aren't always done the way they used to be done, or they have always been done. So just hiring people, having their perspective, having their involvement in your day-to-day makes a huge difference. And it's not like we want to just lean on a training or an etiquette training, or because, like I said, they don't really change behavior. They're great to have, but the way to change behavior is to really hire people with a disability.
Excellent. What are some inclusive best practices when it comes to onboarding employees? And I take this question to mean onboarding, well, I guess, okay, onboarding anybody.
Well, first of all, the first thing to do is to talk to the person who you're hiring. So assuming this is a post-offer pre-hire conversation, right? As soon as you offer them the job, they sign the offer letter, you want to start talking to them about what they need if they have identified as having a disability. I don't really like the word accommodations, but that's another conversation. I think it just has scared people unnecessarily. We all are accommodated in our jobs one way or another. And disability accommodations, just seem to be, disability accommodations are productivity tools, as are everybody else's accommodation, even the coffee we all get. So onboarding, I think it's really important. Like for me, at both jobs, I had to work with our HR people to make sure that when I started, I would have JAWS installed. I would understand what apps they were using. I needed to, well, when I was at Wells Fargo, I got a mobility lesson so I could get from BART in San Francisco to the office, and even around the office, we put labels on like the microwave so I could, I didn't have to ask somebody to help warm up my coffee. And these are really tiny things like the microwave and the refrigerator, but many companies, have this as standard operating practice, making sure if it's a person in a wheelchair, they're coming in, if you have a hybrid schedule that, they can get in. For the most part, I think most companies have desks that go, that go up and down. But really just talking to the person, making sure that they are set up, that they're set up for success. Because what happens is if somebody doesn't have, what they need, they will get behind in their job duties, they'll get a bad evaluation, and they'll leave, and everybody will have a bad experience. And I know I did not answer the question, but I think we're close to out of time. So I want to just make sure that I'm not over speaking. Grace?
Yes, thank you, Kathy. I think we have time for one more question here.
Okay.
So this person says, 10% of our company is disabled, but I would say it's very invisible. Disabilities come in so many different colors, and it can be very easy for someone with a learning disability, for example, to be hired, but a bigger barrier to hire someone with missing limbs, for example. Is it important to have, quote, big, flashy disability, quote, representation?
I think the one word that is used for, I think we call it manifest disability, because I'm not sure what big flashy means, but I get your question. So it is true that people with evident disabilities are discriminated against more from the outset. Like you look at me, you think you see, oh, she's blind. God, must suck to be her. And there's that type of discrimination. People with non-evident disabilities are definitely discriminated against, but it's different. I get calls all the time from colleagues, friends, in their various companies who say, look, I need how do I ask for a modified schedule? And these are people with non-evident disabilities that might have mental illness, might be, re-upping meds. So I think hiring people who are qualified with any type of disability is critical. I know that hiring people with evident disabilities can make a difference, and hiring people with non-evident disabilities can also make a difference. The needs are very different typically, but I think we have. There's arguments on both sides. Let me just say that, because it's good to see people who are different, who do things differently. We are kind of the original life hackers, right? And so I think both people with both evident and non-evident disability have a place in companies for sure.
Absolutely. Well, Kathy, thank you so much for your presentation. We are right at time here, and I want to thank everybody in our audience for joining us and for submitting your great questions.